I always believed that the foundation of a marriage was built on trust and routine. For years, my wife, Catherine, and I had shared a life that seemed ordinary, even predictable, filled with quiet evenings, predictable workdays, and the kind of calm stability that most people yearn for. I prided myself on being a devoted husband, the kind who thought that as long as the daily routines were maintained, nothing could ever go wrong. But life has a way of shattering illusions when you least expect it. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. At first, I noticed that Catherine's attention seemed to wander during our dinner conversations. Instead of engaging with the topics we once discussed passionately, she would stare into space or smile as if recalling some private memory. I chalked it up to exhaustion after a long day at work. However, one evening, while I was tidying up the study, I stumbled upon something that set my heart pounding: a phone left unlocked on the desk, its screen alight with a series of messages that I wasn't meant to see. Curiosity, mixed with an inexplicable dread, compelled me to scroll through the conversation. At first, the messages appeared innocuous, casual greetings and benign banter. But as I read further, a pattern emerged: secret emojis, cryptic references to after-hours meetings, and details that hinted at a connection far beyond friendly banter. My blood ran cold as I realized these messages were exchanged with someone identified only by the initials R. I spent the night in restless torment, the quiet hours stretching endlessly as I mulled over what I had seen. Every word, every punctuation mark, felt loaded with meaning. My mind raced with possibilities, and the certainty of betrayal began to sink in. It wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. The tone of the text suggested a clandestine romance that had been hidden from my eyes for far too long. The following morning, I attempted to maintain the facade of normality as I joined Catherine for breakfast. I watched her carefully, her gestures, her tone of voice, the way her eyes seemed to avoid mine. Every smile now felt like a mask concealing secrets, every gentle laugh a prelude to a lie. Yet, I couldn't confront her immediately. I needed more evidence. The texts were a clue, but I had to know if there was more to the story. Days turned into a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights as I wrestled with the growing suspicion. My every waking moment was consumed by the hidden messages on that phone. I began to scour through old emails and documents on our shared computer, desperate to piece together a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Late one night, while the rest of the house slept, I discovered a folder buried deep in our shared drive labeled Confidential. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a trove of secret emails, detailed correspondences between Catherine and R. The language was intimate, coded in ways that spoke of longing and betrayal. Every email I read painted a picture of a relationship that had blossomed in the shadows of her work life. They detailed meetings at a nearby cafe, long phone calls that stretched into the early hours, and promises of a future that would be far removed from the life we had built together. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It felt as if the foundation of my entire existence was crumbling beneath me. The evidence was overwhelming, and the pain was unimaginable. I sat there, staring at the screen as the reality of Catherine's double life hit me like a tidal wave. The emails revealed plans, dreams, and secrets shared with someone I had never even heard her mention by name. The shock gave way to a deep, gnawing sadness that took hold of me. I had always trusted her implicitly. The thought that she had been leading a parallel life, one filled with passion and intrigue, was both heartbreaking and enraging. Yet, even amid the pain, I felt a need to understand. I started to compile every piece of evidence: the texts, the emails, the subtle clues hidden in phone call logs and calendar entries. My heart ached as I realized that I was not merely a passive observer of my own unraveling, but an active detective in a mystery that I never wanted to solve. Each new discovery deepened the wound of betrayal, and the person I thought I knew was quickly becoming a stranger. I wrestled with conflicting emotions: the urge to confront her immediately, the need to dig deeper to understand the full extent of her deception, and the paralyzing fear that the more I discovered, the less there would be left of the life I once cherished. Every moment was a torment, every memory of our happier times now tainted by the cold, hard evidence of infidelity. In those long, sleepless nights, I questioned every aspect of our marriage. Had I been so blind to the signs? Were there hints in her casual glances or half-hearted responses that I had ignored in my complacency? My mind replayed every conversation, every shared smile, now tinted with suspicion and grief. I realized that I was standing at the precipice of a truth too painful to fully accept. The evidence was irrefutable. Catherine's secret affair with her office rival, R, was not a momentary lapse but a sustained betrayal that had unfolded over months. It was a secret that had been hidden in plain sight, masked by the routines of everyday life. The texts and emails, once mere fragments of digital communication, now formed a damning narrative that exposed a love that I had never been part of. The discovery left me reeling, desperate for answers and struggling to come to terms with the magnitude of the betrayal. In that moment, I knew that everything would change. The life I had known, the trust, the shared dreams, the quiet stability was irrevocably shattered by the revelation of Catherine's double life. I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the glow of the computer screen illuminating a world of secrets and lies that had been hidden from me for so long. The pain was raw and unyielding, a bitter reminder that sometimes the people we love can be the ones who hurt us the most. As I finally shut down the computer, the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me, and I knew that the time for denial had long passed. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would confront the woman I thought I knew. But tonight, I was left alone with the haunting evidence of a betrayal that had shattered my illusions and left me questioning every promise we had once made to each other. In the days following the discovery, my world became a battleground of emotions. Each morning, I awoke with a heavy heart, the evidence of Catherine's secret life a constant, unwelcome presence in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that every text message, every email, was a nail in the coffin of the life we had built together. I became a prisoner to the evidence, meticulously reviewing every piece of digital correspondence that painted a damning picture of betrayal. I started to notice small details that I had once taken for granted, the way Catherine's hand would tremble when she answered her phone, the furtive glances she cast over her shoulder when she thought I wasn't watching. These subtle signals, once dismissed as quirks, now loomed large as symbols of her hidden transgressions. I found myself obsessively tracking her schedule, cross-referencing her calendar with the timestamps of her emails and texts. The more I pieced together, the more undeniable it became. Catherine was living a double life, one that was as passionate as it was secretive. Every piece of evidence deepened the betrayal. I discovered that R wasn't just an office colleague. He was someone who had worked closely with Catherine for years. The email spoke of stolen moments in crowded conference rooms and secret rendezvous in quiet corners of the city. There were even plans for meetings that she had canceled at the last minute, with vague excuses that no longer made any sense. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment affair. It was a carefully orchestrated deception that had taken root over time. The digital trail was relentless. I uncovered hidden folders on her computer containing pictures, snapshots of meetings, and even images of Catherine and R sharing intimate moments and locations I had never even dreamed of. With each new discovery, the reality of the situation became clearer, and the pain of betrayal cut deeper. I began to document everything, writing down dates, times, and details in a journal that soon became my only confidant in this dark period of my life. Every time I reread those secret emails, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, not just of the trust one had in Catherine, but of the future we had planned together. I recalled the promises we had made, the dreams we had shared in whispered conversations long before the routine of daily life had set in. All those cherished moments now seemed tainted by the specter of deception. I wondered how it was possible that the woman I loved could harbor such hidden desires, and how her need for passion had driven her into the arms of another. There were moments when I felt a desperate urge to confront her immediately, to demand answers and explanations. But even as anger surged within me, I knew that a hasty confrontation would only shatter any remnants of dignity left in our relationship. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal, every detail, every secret meeting, before I could face her. So I continued to gather evidence, letting the digital footprints speak for themselves. The weight of what I had discovered began to affect every part of my daily existence. I found myself distracted at work, lost in thought as the evidence replayed in my mind. Nights turned into a blur of restless pacing and anguished introspection as I tried to reconcile the woman I had once adored with the one whose hidden life was now laid bare before me. The man I had been, a man who believed in the sanctity of marriage, felt powerless in the face of such a calculated deception. Friends noticed the change in me, remarking on the distant look in my eyes and the heaviness of my spirit. I tried to explain that something was amiss, but the words felt hollow. The truth was too raw, too painful to share, and I was afraid that even if I spoke of it, no one could truly understand the depth of the betrayal. Instead, I buried myself further into the evidence, each new piece a reminder of how thoroughly I had been deceived. In the silence of my study, I began to question my own worth. Had I been so blinded by routine and comfort that I failed to notice the subtle signals of a hidden passion? The questions tormented me, mixing with the evidence until I could no longer tell where my own insecurities ended and Catherine's betrayal began. I felt isolated in a world that had suddenly turned cold and unforgiving, where every message and every email was a testament to the life I thought I knew, a life that was now irreversibly lost. The evidence was no longer just digital artifacts. It had become the lens through which I viewed my entire existence. With every passing day, the truth was carved deeper into my soul. Catherine's betrayal was not a single moment of weakness, but a carefully nurtured secret that had grown and flourished in the shadows of our life together. The pain was indescribable, a mix of sorrow, anger, and the crushing realization that I was living with a deception that cut to the core of my being. As I prepared for the inevitable confrontation, I resolved to remain calm and collected. I knew that the evidence was irrefutable, and that eventually, I would have to face Catherine with the full weight of the truth. But for now, I allowed myself to immerse in the details, each email and text a stepping stone on the long, painful path toward understanding and, perhaps, eventual closure. That night, as I closed my journal and powered down my computer for the final time, I felt the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. The evidence had spoken in volumes, leaving me with no choice but to confront the reality of Catherine's secret life. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would finally break the silence and demand the truth from the woman I once believed was my soulmate. The day of confrontation arrived with a storm raging outside, a fitting mirror for the turmoil inside me. I awoke with my heart pounding, the evidence of Catherine's betrayal burning in my mind like an unbearable truth. I had rehearsed every word, every question, yet as I got ready for the day, I found myself paralyzed by a mix of dread and determination. Today, there would be no more secrets. The hidden messages and emails would be laid bare, and I would finally confront the woman who had deceived me so thoroughly. At breakfast, Catherine appeared unusually subdued. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, now darted around the room as if searching for an escape. I tried to maintain my composure as I sat across from her, but the dam of pent-up emotions was about to burst. I decided that the moment of truth had come. "Catherine," I said softly, "we need to talk." My voice was steady, but my hands trembled as I reached for the folder where I had compiled every piece of evidence. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between us like an insurmountable chasm. Finally, I slid the folder across the table, its contents laid out in cold, hard detail, screenshots of texts, copies of emails, and timestamps that painted the undeniable picture of a secret affair with her office rival, known only as R. I watched her face closely, searching for any sign of remorse or explanation. Her eyes widened in shock as she glanced at the evidence. I could see the color draining from her face, replaced by a mixture of fear and regret. She stammered, but I interrupted, my voice breaking with the weight of betrayal. "Explain to me how you could hide this from me for so long. How could you let these secrets grow while we built a life together?" For a long while, she said nothing. The only sound was the relentless patter of rain against the window and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Catherine began to speak. She confessed that what had started as harmless flirting had escalated into something far more dangerous, a secret relationship that had offered her an escape from the monotony of our daily life. She admitted that her interactions with R had begun during long, lonely afternoons at work, when she felt isolated and unappreciated. Over time, the clandestine meetings had become a refuge, a way to feel desired and alive in a world that had grown too predictable. I listened, my heart shattering with every word. Each detail of her confession only deepened the wound of betrayal. She spoke of stolen moments, of whispers shared in quiet corners, and of a passion that had ignited in her when I least expected it. Yet, even as she explained, I could see the conflict in her eyes, the remorse of a woman who realized too late that her search for excitement had come at the cost of everything we had built together. As the conversation wore on, I struggled to reconcile the Catherine I had loved with the woman who now stood before me, a woman whose hidden life had been so meticulously concealed that even now, the shock was almost too great to bear. I demanded to know if there was any part of her that still loved me, if the life we had shared meant anything at all in the face of this betrayal. Her eyes filled with tears as she murmured that she did care, that the love we had once known was real, but that somewhere along the way, she had felt lost, desperate for something to fill the void in her heart. The raw honesty of her confession cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. In that painful moment, I realized that our marriage was not simply defined by the day-to-day routines, but by the secrets that had been allowed to fester beneath the surface. The hidden messages, the secret emails, they were not just evidence of an affair, but symbols of a deeper disconnect that had grown between us over time. I felt both anger and sorrow in equal measure, a mix of betrayal and grief that left me reeling. The confrontation was not merely an explosion of accusations. It was the painful beginning of a process that would force us to confront the truths we had long tried to ignore. As tears streamed down my face, I vowed that I would no longer allow deception to define our future. I demanded that she tell me everything, the full extent of her relationship with R, the reasons behind her actions, and whether there was any hope for redemption in the wreckage of our shared life. In the midst of that raw, unfiltered moment, I realized that I had reached a crossroads. The evidence of betrayal was overwhelming, but it also presented a choice, to wallow in despair or to seek a path toward understanding and healing. As the storm outside subsided into a fragile calm, I resolved that I would need time to process everything, time to decide whether the love we once had was worth fighting for, or if the damage was irreparable. That day marked a turning point in my life. The confrontation, as agonizing as it was, forced me to face the truth of Catherine's secret double life. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again, and that the journey ahead would be long and painful. But I also recognized that I could not simply let the betrayal define me. In that moment of bitter clarity, I began to understand that even in the darkest of times, there might be a chance for redemption if we were willing to confront the pain head-on. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, the aftermath of Catherine's betrayal settled over our lives like a heavy, unyielding fog. The once familiar rhythm of our home had been replaced by an atmosphere of uncertainty and sorrow. I found myself oscillating between overwhelming grief and a numb determination to reclaim what remained of my identity. Every day was a struggle to process the evidence of her secret life, a life that had been carefully hidden behind smiles and whispered reassurances. I immersed myself in memories of the past, revisiting moments of laughter and shared dreams that now seemed both distant and painfully fragile. I questioned everything. Was I complicit in allowing our marriage to fall into a routine so predictable that Catherine felt she had no choice but to seek passion elsewhere? Was there something in my own actions, or in my inaction, that had created a void she desperately tried to fill? These questions haunted me as I attempted to make sense of the betrayal that had unraveled my world. Despite the agony, I began to understand that confronting the truth was the only way forward. I sought counsel from close friends, those who had known Catherine and me for years, and found that while many expressed sympathy, few could truly grasp the depth of my pain. I spent long hours in solitude, pouring my thoughts onto paper and revisiting every digital trace of her secret life. The texts, the emails, every detail became both a reminder of what I had lost and a catalyst for the difficult journey of acceptance. Slowly, I began to see that the hidden evidence was not just an end, it was also a beginning. The painful revelations forced me to confront not only Catherine's betrayal but also my own shortcomings. I realized that I had taken our everyday routine for granted, never questioning the subtle shifts that occurred as the years passed. The comfort of familiarity had blinded me to the changes in her, and now, with everything exposed, I was left to pick up the pieces of a broken trust. In the wake of that painful confrontation, Catherine and I attempted to rebuild what remained of our relationship. There were moments of tentative reconciliation, quiet evenings when we would talk about the past without anger, when we allowed ourselves to acknowledge the mistakes that had been made. But each conversation was fraught with the knowledge that nothing would ever be quite the same. The betrayal had carved a deep scar, one that might one day fade but would never fully disappear. I began to set boundaries for myself, determined not to let the pain define my future. I sought therapy, and through long, arduous sessions, I started to untangle the web of betrayal, guilt, and regret that had enveloped my mind. I learned that healing was not a linear process. It was a series of small steps forward, each one as significant as it was painful. I discovered that forgiveness, both for Catherine and for myself, was a long journey, a journey that required confronting the raw truths of our shared past. One chilly evening, as I walked through the park alone, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet, I felt a subtle shift within me. The bitter sting of betrayal was still there, but in its place, a fragile hope began to emerge. I realized that while the evidence of Catherine's secret life had destroyed the illusion of our perfect marriage, it also forced me to rediscover who I was beyond the role of a husband. In the process, I began to see that even in the ruins of deception, there could be a chance for renewal, a chance to build a future defined not by past betrayals, but by the courage to start over. That night, as I sat at my desk writing down my thoughts, I felt a quiet determination settle in my heart. The road ahead was uncertain, and the wounds of betrayal would take time to heal. Yet, I also recognized that I was finally ready to move forward. I no longer allowed the hidden texts and secret emails to define my existence. Instead, I chose to view them as painful lessons that, despite their harshness, had given me the clarity to seek a new beginning. In the quiet aftermath of that storm of betrayal, I made a promise to myself that I would not let the darkness of the past obscure the possibility of light. I would honor the truth, no matter how painful, and use it as a foundation to rebuild my life, piece by piece, day by day. As I closed the journal that night, I knew that while the evidence of Catherine's affair would always be a part of my history, it no longer held the power to dictate my future. The journey toward healing was just beginning, and though the scars of betrayal remained, they served as a reminder that even in the face of profound deception, there is the possibility of growth and renewal. I embraced the future with cautious optimism, determined to forge a path forward that was guided by truth, resilience, and the hope of finding a peace that had long eluded me.